Duval! All right, Jaguars fans, here's the deal. We're going to be talking about this through a fantasy football lens, but to know what's going on actually getting the results, you have to know how the team is going to be using your players. That's a fact of life. So when we're talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars, I want to start what I believe is the more compelling story with this team, which is their wide receiver room. Obviously, Christian Kirk gets signed as a free agent last year, and he shows up. Man, he did good. He was the kind of guy that you got late and you got really good results with. And this year, they're bringing on Ridley from Atlanta, who they traded for mid-year, loses the entire season from betting on the NFL. But prior to that, basically didn't want to play for Atlanta anymore and sat himself out. But when he was on, is an absolute stud. So, Bob, I know you have thoughts on Ridley, and I want to give you the floor with him, man.
Yeah, so everybody by this point in time have seen the unpadded training camp footage of Ridley's cuts in comparison to Zay Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And last year, Zay Jones was a good piece for this offense.
Wasn't a talented piece.
No, that's why I said good. That's why I said good. But Calvin Ridley elevates this team.
Oh, yeah.
We have suspected that, what really is important when it comes to players coming back after a full year of an absence is your drive to want to play.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still want to play football?
Yeah.
And it looks like Calvin Ridley still wants to play football. He's still very talented by all the metrics that we would want a wide receiver to be. When he left, he was tearing it up in Atlanta. And we saw him getting a lot of red zone targets. We saw him getting a tremendous amount of touchdowns because we also saw Julio Jones not getting those touchdowns. And we both like Julio Jones as well.
Love Julio. Hall of Famer.
So he's coming into a year now where you have a Jaguars team that passed the ball as one of the highest ranked passing games in the league.
And they didn't do it in proportional route. They threw it the league average. They threw it 60% of the times. They were just good.
They ranked 7th
in
total yards per game and 9th in total points per game. So they're putting points on the board. And so it's only logical to assume that with a true wide receiver one like Ridley is,
which he is,
that the stats are going to at least see a moderate incline for Trevor Lawrence, but Ridley is going to get a lot of targets. And people think that's going to hurt Kirk's value, and you can see that in the rankings. Kirk is being drafted around the 75th overall player, 30th ranked wide receiver, and Ridley is ranked about the 19th, although he's climbing after that video. I've seen him being drafted as early as the 3rd round, but usually he settles somewhere in the 4th. And that, if you go wide receiver early and you take a running back to balance it out, he slots in as your 3rd wide receiver, potentially your 2nd wide receiver. And if you go running back early, he slots in as your number 1 wide receiver. In this type of offense, Ridley is going to cook.
Oh, yeah.
And the only thing keeping him back would be his conditioning if he were to get injured, because he was off of a full year. We don't know how that's going to play a role into his year. But we do know that Trevor Lawrence loves to throw the ball in the red zone.
Absolutely, he does, because they don't hand it off in the red zone.
When you look at his numbers in the red zone last year for Trevor Lawrence, and you look at the numbers inside the 20, he had 20 touchdowns passing within the red zone. And if you go inside
while you're on Lawrence, I want to point out another key factor, because this comes into play with all this. He turned on about week 7. And before that, he threw 12 picks. After that, he threw 4. Like he got his game to like old school proficiency numbers that were in the same level. Granted, the touchdowns weren't as high yet, but the same level as Rodgers. He was not throwing interceptions. And that what comes with that? Red zone confidence. And now they has an actual red zone target that he did not have before.
Yeah.
Dude, I love Ridley this year.
82 attempts within the 20 last year. He completed about 53% of them. But that's
normal.
82 of his attempts, and he already passed it for a boatload
Mm-hmm.
last year. You only can assume that that could happen again.
It should.
And Ridley is elite. You should try to find a way for him to be on your team. And when you're looking at the 4th round, if you've played your cards right, and if you're drafting in a good enough position in the 4th round, you can take him at ADP. If you're in the 3rd round and you're drafting at the top of like if you come back from the turn and you're going to pick 1, 2, 3, or 4, you're going to have to take them in the 3rd round.
So let me give you a comparison question here. There's this whole group of really good receivers at the end of the 2nd turn. Higgins, Olave, Devontae Smith in Philly. Do you believe Ridley is going to end up in that cluster by the time the drafts start happening in August?
Do I think he's going to end up at the beginning, at the end of the 2nd, beginning of the 3rd?
Yes.
The only way he ends up at the beginning of the 3rd is 1, if the camp goes well. 2, if you want him there.
Mm-hmm.
Because realistically, if you're looking at, where
his talent level is insane.
His talent level is insane. And I'm going to tell you the guys that I would rather have Calvin Ridley over.
That's what I want to hear.
Okay. I'd rather have him over DJ Moore. I would rather have him over Deebo Samuel. Mm-hmm. I would rather have him over Amari Cooper. I'd rather have him over T. Higgins. And I would rather have him over probably DK Metcalf, knowing how the target share.
So you are putting him right there with Olave and Devonta Smith when it's all said and done.
So when it's all said and done, he's probably going to get drafted at the top of the 3rd round, the end of August, early September, when these drafts take place.
And I think it's going to be a great fit.
If you're drafting now in best ball leagues, or if you're drafting at all, he's probably in best ball leagues going even higher.
Yeah.
But I would say at this point in time, if your draft is kicking off this week or next week, you can still probably get him in the 4th round. Otherwise, you're going to probably have to take him somewhere in the 3rd round. And
dude, I don't have to squint very hard to see a world where Calvin Ridley leads the receivers in touchdowns. That's not a hard look. I'm
not that upset about this because his skill set, his size, his ability, it's all there. And if you just go, and
he's in the best offensive system he's ever been in.
If you go back to 2020, and this is the last time we saw Calvin Ridley ball out on Atlanta, he had 143 targets, 90 of them he caught, for 1,374 yards and 9 touchdowns. And that's the last time we saw him play a full year. And in 2021, before he left and was caught on the gambling in week 7, he was out 1 game and there was a bye week. So he played in 5 games. He had 281 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that's not at all out of the realm of possibility here to get better than. It's not like he lost a step there. It's just that they weren't a very good team, the Falcons were, whenever this was happening. And so when you look at Calvin Ridley and you say, well, who's a guy that should go above his ADP? It's Calvin Ridley, because there's nothing about this offense that tells you that he's in a bad situation. And he is the clear number 1. Whereas I love Christian Kirk.
But Christian Kirk, I think, benefits from it because he's going to become less expensive. But I don't think Kirk's production is going to dip. As you said earlier, Ridley elevates all boats. I do believe that what we're going to see down in Jacksonville is a transition to even greater passing. Last year, if you remember the Jacksonville story, they basically considered that Trevor Lawrence's rookie year because he didn't have a real head coach during his actual rookie year. And you saw him go through that maturation, and when it caught like wildfire. And every single logical answer is give that guy the ball more and go at it. So I don't see Jacksonville only throwing the ball 60% of the time next year. I see it being much higher, 65%-ish. And as a result, they're already one of the better 3rd down conversion teams in the league, and they were 55% in the red zone. So what I expect with Ridley is more holes open in the receiving core, because Christian Kirk, I mean, let's be honest, he put up great numbers last year. He is not the best talented receiver in the NFL. He's probably about 25th-ish. He's behind McLaurin in terms of actual talent on the field. And making him now the genuine number 2, I believe, actually helps him a lot when it's all said and done. And as the perception of Ridley skyrocketing, you're going to see Kirk in kind drop. And Kirk, to me, is going to be the value pick of this Jacksonville Jaguars team. And I just think that's a very important thing to look at as we're concluding the conversation about the Jaguars passing game.
Not concluding yet, because here's an interesting stat that you'll like here. When we look at the target rate percentage of Ridley the last time we saw him in the red zone and Christian Kirk last year caught 13 balls for 98 yards and 7 touchdowns. He had a 40% target share.
That's solid.
When we last saw Calvin Ridley in Atlanta, inside the 20, he had 11 receptions on 20 targets. He had a target percentage of 35%, 35.7%, and 7 touchdowns. So these two guys, when forced into that red zone role, these two players exceed their expectations. This has a twofold meaning to me. Threefold meaning, actually.
Break it down.
You will elevate both Ridley and Kirk. I would want to have one of those two guys on my team.
I agree.
Kirk is much cheaper, but Ridley, I think, will overall probably end up the season much better. That means I also am devaluing Travis Etienne.
Yes.
When you look at Travis Etienne from just any perspective, really, but particularly in that red zone, he had about – it wasn't nice. I owned Travis Etienne last year, and there was a couple of games where I was like, okay, he's really good. He's really a neat kind of toy here. But when we look at it inside the 5, and that's really where these running backs should stand out if you're down within the 5. He had 3 touchdowns within the 5-yard line. Trevor Lawrence had 5. If Trevor Lawrence doesn't rush those in and those go to Etienne, you are taking Etienne in the second round this year because you're expecting that kind of volume to continue. He only had 13 attempts with inside the 5. If you go back inside the 15, he only had 31 attempts, 4 touchdowns. He had 62% of the rushes because you're going to give the ball to James Robinson. You're going to give the ball to Jermichael Hasty. All right, come on. But let's be honest here, is receiving-wise, within those same numbers, within the 15, he had 5 targets all year. And this is a team that has Evan Ingram. This is a team that had Kirk. This is a team that had Zay Jones. 5 targets for a running back within the 15 yards, that isn't good. And when you look at what Travis Etienne did last year, and you say, well, Travis Etienne is a receiving back. He's not. He had about 35 receptions for 300 yards, and I don't believe he accumulated any touchdowns on that. So when you look at, he had 60% of the running back receptions. Jermichael Hasty had
well, the point is Lawrence is throwing the ball downfield. He's doing it right. That offense is built very well.
Lawrence is throwing the ball downfield, but even when they get there, when they get to that red zone, those balls are going to the wide receivers. And those are the players that you want to own. And even if you take it and you say, okay, well, in a PPR league, is it any better? Well, no. Not really. Within the PPR format, if you go within the 15-yard line, he had 37.3 PPR points.
Not good.
So let's take that to Christian Kirk inside the 15-yard line, 48.4. And I can get him, granted, in a different position.
But way cheaper.
But I can get him way cheaper than that. If I put this out to just 20, Kirk is at 64.8. And Travis Etienne is still sitting at 41.1.
Yeah, so it really breaks it down. He's not worth it. And the thing that I'm going to want to conclude, I think the Jaguars show with, we haven't talked about this with a lot of teams going through it, but with the Jaguars is certainly one we should be. Their defense is going to be a fantasy stud defense. When you look at their schedule, they have 8 to 10 games where their defense is 100%, no debate, cannot fight at all, better than the opposition's offense. And they have another couple that are borderline with that maybe. This team's defense has a chance of being a top 5 fantasy defense, and they are not priced like it. Because they're not sexy like the Eagles or the Cowboys, but they should be.
And here's the other thing too, Joe, is that Trevor Lawrence, 58th overall, 8th best quarterback on the board. You can get him in the 6th, 7th rounds in some leagues. And you just have to make the decision that in that 6th or 7th round, are you solid enough that you wouldn't want to wait 2 rounds to get Deshaun Watson or wait 2 rounds to get Dak or Kirk Cousins? Because this offense...
Oh, I don't think it's comparable. I think Lawrence is in a tier above all of them.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're going to wait 2 rounds to get the other 2. So
yeah, I think I'd rather have Lawrence.
You take Trevor Lawrence in the 6th or 7th. And I say when you're looking at what's around when Trevor Lawrence is around, if you were to look at the ADP, depending on how you've constructed your team, Trevor Lawrence is going to be a stud this year.
Mm-hmm.
In Dynasty, you're keeping him. You're probably keeping him for the next 3 years.
At least.
And, you know, I've had things go haywire when I've talked about players and saying that they're going to do good. But the only thing that's limiting Trevor Lawrence here is an injury. Mm-hmm. And that goes for any quarterback in the league, really, when it comes to these top 8 quarterbacks. Trevor Lawrence could end the season as quarterback 2, quarterback 3. He rushes when he needs to.
Mm-hmm. Very Mahomes-like in that regard.
He passes
incredibly well.
And if you look at his, and this is the greatest stat for Trevor Lawrence that you would want to have. When you get to that red zone, like we said, within the 20, he has 20 passing touchdowns and 5 rushing touchdowns. 25 total touchdowns last year came within that red zone. Last year, he only threw for 25 touchdowns. So you look at it and you say, is there upward momentum for Trevor Lawrence? There's a very good possibility that Trevor Lawrence could finish the year with 38 or more touchdowns, knowing that Calvin Ridley will help this team, and knowing that Christian Kirk will continue to help this team, and knowing that Evan Ingram is still on this team.
Mm-hmm.
This team is a very good team. That defense is going to make sure that this team continues to produce. The only thing, like I said, that's holding them back would be those injuries.
Yeah, this team, I mean, obviously, I think they're pretty clearly the front runners to win their division. Mm-hmm. And they're going to have themselves – they have one of the easiest schedules in the NFL to start with. And there's a lot of games that you're going to be putting them going, well, this is going to be just point city. I mean, their division doesn't really play very good defense, especially against the pass. They're mostly built to stop the run, this division is, because of Henry's in it.
Well, they play Houston twice.
And that's what they play Houston twice, who can't stop anything. They play the Colts, who's not really that good against the pass, and the Titans aren't good against the pass either.
And they play Tampa.
And they play the entire NFC South, who don't know what defense is. So when you look at that thing, you know, when your best defense in a division is potentially Carolina's, you're in a bad defensive division. That's 10 of their games. Not to mention, they also play Cleveland. You know, when we look at what this team is in the playoff run, your championship week with the Jaguars is playing Tampa Bay. And talk about a defense to feast on. So this is a team that, by Jags, Kirk, Lawrence, Ridley obviously being the ones off the bus on ETN because he's not going to get the ball there. Because it's got, in my mind, this is going to become a lot like the Colts. Let him throw it in the end zone. He's not throwing the picks, and you know you're going to get the points. Mm-hmm. Duval!